Okay, y'all are a little bit lucky. This is the first time that I've actually taught this class. And generally speaking, what happens, well, I'm sorry, the first time that I've taught it in like 10 years. And usually what happens with things like this is that when you get started, oftentimes it's a little bit easier because you haven't quite figured out all the things that you want to get into some of the specifics on. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and put some terms up, and I'm going to make sure that I add these. The other thing, though, that's going to be really, really important, and I think it's safe to say that this first chapter is the big one. This first chapter is the big one. So are y'all comfortable with any of or all of the articles? Are y'all good as far as these are concerned? Do you have any questions? Go ahead.
So we didn't, just for my own, for the test, we're going to be tested on the articles as well?
Absolutely. And the articles are probably going to be the biggest piece on this. So when you go through and you start looking at the articles, A, make sure that you can give me kind of the issue. B, kind of give me point, counterpoint. And then C, kind of give me an idea as far as like what the ultimate win or what the ultimate ruling was, things along these lines. If you remember, the very first day we had dealt with the Big Mac article, and it was the idea about trying to prohibit the building of fast food restaurants in some of the less affluent communities outside of Los Angeles, and it went through a number of different articles there, or different arguments there, I should say. The Textalizer, do y'all remember Textalizer?
Yeah.
What was Textalizer?
The device that would be able to pop into your phone after an accident to assess if you've been using your phone more than
I want to say it was New York that actually was experimenting with this. And basically the gist of it was that if there was an accident and the police came up, they were investigating, what they could actually do is they had a device that they could plug into your phone, not to read your text messages, but in fact to say if you had texted while the actual accident was taking place. So they could kind of catch you. And of course this would lead to different liability issues. When you go back through and you look at that article, there are also a number of privacy issues that are going to be a part of this. So kind of keep that thought in mind. And this was an experimental thing, but it appears as though it's coming. So kind of keep that thought. Do you remember Lethal Weapon?
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Yeah, it's my favorite, she says, with 9 minutes left to go. Notice up here, Lethal Weapon, a lethal right to self-defense. And this was actually talking about stand your ground laws. Do you remember when we had this discussion? When you look at the articles, and I try and say this, you're going to notice themes, okay? We've had gun articles in several chapters, and we've had several different takes on some of these gun articles. So maybe a theme that you might want to think about would be the gun piece. But make sure that you can explain, for example, what this stand your ground is. Make sure that you get an idea in there about, again, some of the positives and the negatives on it. And ultimately with this one, it's not really that there was a ruling on this, but it would probably be more geared toward gun freedom or gun rights in general. So kind of keep that thought in mind. But lethal right to self-defense. Going on this and just kind of rolling our way down. Surveillance. Do y'all remember when Muslims are all suspect?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have had several that could deal with guns. I think you could argue we have had several now that could deal with religion, or you could make an argument that we've had several that deal with police practices. So again, be thinking about maybe some of the larger themes. But if you remember in this one, dealing with when Muslims are all suspect or are suspect, the basic idea was that the New York City Police Department had begun to target people specifically because of their religion, and they were targeting these folks specifically because of their religion, because there was a sense that this could lead to some breaks in terrorist cases, or maybe less of a chance of terrorist violence. Now, I want to be careful as we get into this, because effectively, if you remember on this, the NYPD said that they broke some possible plots. But you could also make an argument that this is incredibly discriminatory. It's incredibly against the First Amendment. I mean, there are a number of different pieces to this. The New York City Police, the NYPD ultimately got caught doing this, and they are not supposed to be doing it anymore. They ended up having to pay a fine. But for our purposes, make sure that you can explain that. The Bloomberg gun giveaway. Shannon, I know this is one of your faves. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, one of my favorites.
Go ahead.
What do you want me to say about it? What happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Okay, so Bloomberg was suing gun dealers in other states because the guns that they legally sold, those purchasers then sold them to criminals, and those guns were being used in crimes in New York City.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And ultimately on this, Bloomberg was trying to go after these gun dealers, and his thought was, okay, you know what? If you've sold these guns and ultimately these crimes are being committed in New York City, this is my jurisdiction, this is my city, my government is responsible for this, so we're actually going to step outside of our jurisdiction to deal with you. Now, if you remember on this, and I've even shown you a video, and if you go back and you look, the gun dealers technically sold them legally, like you said, but you kind of knew that something was up based upon the way that the sale interaction was going. Now, with that being said, the gun dealers pretty much did the right thing. There were a couple of exceptions to that. And ultimately, in this case, Bloomberg ended up dropping this lawsuit. He ended up dropping this lawsuit. He could not go into these other jurisdictions, although some of the gun dealers did ultimately allow themselves to be monitored by outside people in order to make sure that the purchases were right. Do y'all remember the high-speed chase? Go ahead.
That was the 19-year-old who was speeding upwards to 90 miles an hour.
You remember what state this was in? It was in Georgia. You had this teenager that was actually driving and got into a high-speed car chase with the police officers. And I believe this chase went, I think it was a little bit more than 15 minutes, but I might be wrong on that. But it was a pretty good chase, and it was mid to late evening. So I think it was around 10:30 at night, right in that range. Not incredibly late, but there was still traffic out on the road. With that being said, what made the controversy on this?
That the police sirened or told him to get off the road because he was going over the speed limit, and he continued to go.
Yeah, and then what happened?
They tried putting barricades, and he avoided those as well. So
He ran through the barricades. He crashed into some police cars, different things like this. Ultimately, what did the police do?
they took him out. Was it?
They hit his car.
They hit his
so
car
then
and
he
then
crashed.
crashed.
They hit his car, and then if you remember on this, his car did things that cars just aren't supposed to do, going down an embankment, and he was medically banged up really bad. You remember what it was? Quadriplegic, that's what I remember too. So when you notice on this, there was a lawsuit, and the debate that we had in class was this kid was old enough so that he should know better than to run from the police, and had he not run from the police, he would have never been rendered a quadriplegic after the fact of all of this high-speed chase. Others had said, wait a minute. When they saw the police car hit that car and then see it twist and spin and all of the dust kick up over in the periphery of the film, it's like, what the hell are these police officers doing? What were they thinking was going to happen when they actually rammed up against the back? I think bumped or tapped.
Barely tapped them.
But it's just you going fast enough. I mean,
That's what they do. When there's a car chase, they tap them on the side so the car can spin around.
tap them on the side. Yeah. Yeah, that's going on the test. Yeah, that's going on a test. But anyway, tap them on the side. Whatever the case is, ultimately, did the police win or did the guy get a judgment? The police did win. And the thought on this is not only was he endangering himself,
He was endangering others.
but he was endangering
He was in a
others.
40
And
mile
the cop car.
speed zone.
Hit a cop car. I mean, there were all sorts of things. And the police ultimately, they did win. So this is legal to tap them from the side. Yeah. Tap from the side, yeah. Notice on here, and I think, oh yeah, the disaster reliefs. Do y'all remember the disaster relief?
How could we ever forget?
Wow, you're so salty today, Shannon. I don't understand why. Don't talk about prayer around Shannon. Oh, dear God. Disaster relief. Do y'all remember what this one was?
Yep, Newport News.
Actually, Magic Marker was Newport News. What was disaster relief, though?
Which one was that?
That was the impending storm, and then people came through to evacuate citizens, and then they refused. And so the controversy was if the support team should go back in, risking their own lives to save people that said they didn't want to go in the first place.
Magic Marker was basically talking about Newport News, but they were also comparing it to New Orleans. And the idea in the Magic Marker article was that A, if people, you know a bad storm is coming, and you send around people in order to go in there and evacuate them, then in fact they need to evacuate. You have to go back and get them and spend resources, endanger lives. What was the trick with the Magic Marker?
Write your social on your arm.
They basically would give out permanent magic markers, and they said, if you're not going to leave, write your social on your arm, write it somewhere visible, write it in a couple of places so that we can identify you, because you may be dead by the time that we come back. And the difference was that Newport News evidently has also had a significant number of hurricanes. Newport News has also had, in fact, they've got a significant minority population there, but they didn't have nearly the issues that New Orleans did, and they called it tough love. Now, just so in fact you're clear on this one, disaster relief, can't find it in the Constitution. This was that article that actually was bringing up Grover Cleveland up here. And it says, Grover Cleveland said, upon vetoing a bill appropriating money to aid drought-stricken farmers in Texas, said, I find no warrant for such an appropriation in the Constitution, and I do not believe that the power and the duty of the general government ought to be extended to relief of individual suffering, which is in no manner properly related to the public service or benefit. Grover Cleveland was a president that basically said that a lot of things that government does today should not be allowed because it's specifically not in the United States Constitution. Give this one a good read through, because I wouldn't say that we necessarily spent the most amount of time on it, but you'll notice up here it says things, I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending on objects of benevolence the money of their constituents. In other words, this article is saying that the Founding Fathers said that government wouldn't do the things back then that it is doing now because they wrote the document and they didn't think that this was in there. So take a good look at this one, because it's really debating kind of the role of what government should be. Maybe, you know, the conservatives are not as compassionate as some people would hope that they were. Of course, and we get back into chapter 2. And I'll roll through this just a little bit again, focusing on the articles, and then I'm going to post these terms here tonight. But do you remember foul ball?
The lady getting hit in the face with the foul ball, and she had to get major reconstructive facial surgery.
And what was the issue?
Yeah, should the team pay for her injuries, or was she at fault for sitting in the foul ball area where it's notorious for foul balls to hit at?
Buying a ticket is like signing a
waiver.
There is that fine print that's on the back of the ticket. And see, you know, we talk about this idea of whether things should, in fact, you know, talk about being compassionate or, you know, whatever the case might be. Well, she goes to a Red Sox game, and she gets smashed in the face with a foul ball. She has a number of facial procedures. She doesn't work for a significant amount of time. The medical bills are pretty intense. And she actually wants to sue. And it's like you said, when you buy the ticket, when you enter the game, there is fine print on the back of that ticket. And that fine print on the back of the ticket basically says that you accept liability if something were to happen. Bye-bye. And as such on this, while she accepted the liability when that ball smashed her, the team doesn't have to do anything. There are actually cases, not just dealing with women, but children, in fact, that really get messed up in the areas down there. But remember, you know, a lot of people want to be able to get those balls.
Someone get the ball.
Yeah, she's being demanding.
Okay, so we have a little conflict. We have a club out. We have a club outside that's a little pissed off because they have the room reserved and they want us to leave.
Be serious?
Go ahead and stop the camera.
Yeah.